Well, good morning, everybody. I really appreciate having a couple of days there at the end of last week just to be able to spend time with family, kind of take a break from work. I'm sure Matt and Andrew did too, but here we are back at it December 1st. We've got a lot to talk about. So I thought we'd just start off with kind of a month review of what November gave us. And when I go back and think about it, it's going to be the month where I just remember cutoff lows, right? Just lots of these little systems that came into California, and they kind of work their way across the country like this. We did see at the end of the month, though, pretty significant change in the flow pattern as a much deeper Hudson low set up, and that brought up multiple snow events through here, including the one we just saw over the Thanksgiving weekend. But as we just step back and pick out these areas that are drier, there's a lot of Great Lakes states, pockets of the Northeast, and very much the Southeast through Florida that remains very dry. And in a moment, I'm going to show you the prediction for this month, and I want you to take note that this was an area in through here that I think was expected to see much more precipitation than it actually did. And that's all down to understanding the positional strength of the Pacific High, which is going to be another major factor in this upcoming forecast. Now, this was the prediction for the month of November when you go back to the very end of October. And these were the models. The GFS was on the left, the European was on the right. And what I'm really thinking about here is kind of the over-prediction of a much more active polar jet entering the northwest from more of a, well, almost a westerly trajectory. You can see it in both models here. And this is what we had anticipated, bringing up more snow in the Oregon Cascades, for example, and more into the Northern Rockies, too. And it was not predicted to see wetter conditions down into California. And you can just see the models were not finding those very small features that created the cutoff lows that went through the area. Also, the models were really gung-ho about keeping eastern Texas through the Delta, MidSouth very dry. You can see it in both forecast models here. And that forecast wasn't bad through the first 2 weeks of the month. If you don't remember, this is what the first 2 weeks of the month looked like. And we were extremely dry in through this area. And we were drier in the Rocky Mountains. We had already seen our first of a few cutoff lows. But to be honest, we weren't starting off the month too bad in the Northwest either. So I have to look at the models and say maybe their reach for a full 4 weeks in terms of picking up the pattern was not that good. But certainly they were able to decipher the way the front half of the month was going to behave. Regardless, we have to take a look at where we are with things, and our soil moisture numbers look something like this. In a few minutes here, I'm going to head up to O'Hare. We're going to fly over to, I'm going to go to Great Falls, and I'm very keen on talking with some of the folks here at the Montana Grain Growers Association meeting tomorrow about just how dry we've been in this part of Montana. And I spent time out here in the Willamette Valley, and I do know that in terms of normal precipitation, the way we pick it up this time of year, we're behind. Same thing for parts of the Snake River Valley. But some of the recent moisture that's gotten through this corridor and through here has brought soil moisture values up. But now we have snow-covered ground, very cold temperatures over this region. So despite more snow coming into this area, we're dealing with probably some deficits in soil moisture that are now locked. Big changes will be happening here, though, and I'm very excited for this. There was a hint of it last week in the week 2 forecast models, and now we're beginning to see that happen. But I did want to pick out, I always monitor the Mississippi River just as one major river system. And at Memphis right now, we are at 1.32 feet below low stage. It has come up lately about 6 or 7 feet from its bottoming out there in the middle of November. But I just want to show you last December, it was pretty low again. And we're going to take a look at these forecasts showing much of the central part of the U.S. It's got a bit of a drier kick going forward. But then again, last year we really saw some major improvements in the heart of winter on the river levels. Now, temperature-wise, let's go have a quick look at it. This is how the first 3 weeks of November shaped up. Very, very mild from the southern plains through the high plains, getting to the Four Corner States, Rockies, Great Basin, most of the West. Our really cool spot was in the northeastern United States. All right, Florida's a bit cooler as well. But this is kind of, the beginning of the month. The Thanksgiving weekend was quite cold, right? We saw Arctic air, multiple rounds of it coming through this corridor, and we're going to continue to see that. That's our new pattern that we're currently sitting in right now. Now, you look at all of it, the end of the month brought in a big snowstorm. And this was, honestly, I think, when we gave the forecast, what was that, Wednesday? That was my last one for you. I think the models pinned down the area pretty well. We knew there were going to be nuances to the amounts. And one spot is right in through here. See this little area in through here that was lesser? Models didn't have that. That whole region was filled in. But overall, you can see some pretty decent totals. Several places here in Iowa, getting into southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, even central Illinois, and then, of course, downwind side of the Great Lakes. that was able to pick up 8 to 12 inches of snow out of this, which means the atmosphere was able to squeeze out quite a bit. Now, the storm system came in mild. It then got very cold after, but it came in mild. So the actual amount of snow on the ground was very compressed. And that's one of the things that gets to be challenging in the forecast is the liquid to snow ratio. We use a 10 to 1 just as an industry standard. And the atmosphere put out that much, but then when it hit the ground, it compressed quite a bit here in this region. Now, I want to make sure I link for you this map in the show, in the notes below, but it's one of my favorites from the National Weather Service. When you land on it, what I did was I took the little slider bar all the way to 72 hours. I focused in on this event, and you kind of hover around and look at the weather station reports just to see how much was in certain areas. So you can pick out a couple of spots here. Like this is Stout, Iowa, 14.3 inches. I got to head up to O'Hare. Hope they got it cleaned out, because right now we saw some places up there getting 10 to 12 inches of snow. Down here around where I spent the weekend near my grandmother's house, they picked up quite a bit of snow. In fact, in Jacksonville, where just outside of which she lives, there was 10 to 12 inches in that area. Since I mentioned Grandma, and I told you, first of all, I got her age wrong. She's 94, not 96, but this is what she looks like. So grab a quick picture with her there at Thanksgiving. Okay, on to the new system. This is the new morning all hazards weather map today. You can see that lining the Rockies and then stretching out into parts of the plains and Midwest, and then certainly into the Ohio Valley, eastern Great Lakes, into the Northeast where we have a winter storm watch. There is another system. Now, this system doesn't quite have the same potency as the big system that came through after Thanksgiving on Saturday did, and it's coming in at a little bit different trajectory based on where the cold air has now settled into this region since the cold air that arrived on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So let's go have a look at this by looking first at the upper level winds. Guess what? We've got another little cutoff here, but there's a ridge giving us this stacked high over low flow pattern in the west, and that's what's taking the flow and having it enter the northwest like this. We're going to keep an eye on a shortwave that's here, coming into this broader trough that's located there, and at the base of it, this is where our next low is going to be kind of emerging from. Now, I'm going to come back to the rest of, what flanks North America here in just a few minutes, but we need to focus in on this current storm system. I do like the NAMS solution for this right now. Let's pick this up around 6 a.m. this morning and just play this forward, watching the snow move out of parts of Kansas into Missouri and southern Iowa with rain farther to the south. Not a major severe weather threat out of this one, but there will be some storms. And then we see by this afternoon and this evening that snow spreads from Missouri into Illinois, southern Wisconsin. Better rains down here across the south. Now, the second low at that point is moving over the Rockies, so you can start to see some of the snow moving in here this evening. And I'm hoping it comes through this area before I land in Great Falls later tonight, just in case there's a bit of an issue. But this is some decent snow coming into parts of the Midwest here, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, and much needed rains continue to hit this section of the Delta getting into the southeast. Now, what's been tricky is finding that rain-snow boundary on the Ohio River by overnight hours tonight, where we could get some very heavy snows right in through here. Some of the elevation changes can help that as well, and there's the risk of getting a little bit of cold air dammed up right in through this area, giving us the risk of some ice. We need to be aware of that as well. Let's go ahead and play this forward, though. This is now getting into 4 a.m. Tuesday. This is the system we were concerned about having some nor'easter-like characteristics. I mean, the big bad nor'easters, they tend to come across like this and run straight up. We call those Miller A systems. Sometimes they're called Gulf lows. The storm of the century, that massive one that hit back in the 90s, in 1993, if I remember correctly. Boy, it was one of these. But this is more of a, it's not really a panhandle hooker. It's more of just kind of a Miller B, a weaker one that comes into this area. And there you go. This is Tuesday morning, getting throughout the day, and that rain snow line will have to be monitored very carefully. You are just on the other side of it, big, fat, heavy, wet snowflakes. The farther north you go, the more the snow will be a bit lighter and smaller flakes. And then we see this system. Look at this, splitting New Jersey. New York City, you seem to be in the rain for tomorrow, but just surrounding, we're looking at some pretty heavy snows. Now on the backside, you can see the snow coming through here with the little clipper-like system by 9 a.m. Tuesday morning, and that's going to spread some snow through the Dakotas, Minnesota. I'll be spending the middle of my week in Minneapolis, and then I'll be heading over to Sioux Falls for several meetings. Looking forward to seeing some of you growers at these meetings. That system exits by early Wednesday morning. Snow moves over the Great Lakes. Snow moves down through parts of the Rockies here, including the Front Range. we're going to keep our eye out on how much snow we can possibly get right in through this part of Colorado as well. Now let's go look at the model output on snow. We're just going to look straight up with the NAM model, and we can kind of start to see what these totals may look like. Now you start to notice, where does my model break over to 4 inches? At blue. So there's the front range potential for some snow. This is all elevation driven right in through here with where the little plateau and mesa are versus where you get the upslope flow. It's a great forecasting challenge. You can see up in Montana, then you see this swath right in through here of 2 to 3 inches of snow. Some lake effect on the backside, and just watch this corridor right in through it. So along the Ohio River, getting over to West Virginia, which desperately needs the moisture. And then you're going to find a very tight boundary on the northern edge of that precip where the heavy snows are going to be. Now, the NAM tosses out a ton of snow right here in parts of Massachusetts, but we can always look at other models to see what that looks like. I wanted to bring up the NAM's forecast of ice just so you can see those areas that we're concerned about. So starting in Arkansas, rolling right there on that boundary, and then here, pushing up against the Appalachian Mountains between Virginia and West Virginia, we want to watch as well. Okay, broader picture though, this is just the eastern half of the country looking at snowfall totals from this morning's GFS run. So again, it is also hitting this part of Massachusetts pretty hard, over toward Portsmouth and getting up toward this section of Maine as well. But you can see several quarters of the year grabbing some snow. The European is less aggressive, although it does have its bullseye in that same area. But the broader 2 to 3 inch swath in through here, you can see the secondary swath with the lake effect on the backside. Now, let me just do this real quick. Let's go over and look at the west, okay? Now you can see the snows here coming in. Look at that. See a little tendril? That's a very common feature in snowfall across parts of Colorado doing that. But overall, we're not looking at huge amounts in the west, mainly due to the proximity of the Pacific High that's sitting here, okay? Now, don't forget, I made something new for you. Again, let's just do this real quick. Go to agweather.com. You land on the page. It looks something like this, okay? Click on weather maps because we got a lot of feedback that a lot of you just like this, display of weather maps where you can scroll through and find your favorite. On Friday last week, I added this. So now you can see. So remember we had the 5 model rainfall total precipitation maps. Well, I just made them all for snowfall too. So now you can just get a quick glimpse, pick your model, click on it, and see the animation. And I made these 7-day maps, remembering that 7 days out, the model forecasts of snow are not good, but that's just another resource that you can now be accessing on agweather.com. Okay, but let's get back to it. This should have updated. Yeah, there we go. I am curious about this stretch of potential drier weather here and how far into the Canadian prairie extends. We've seen significant improvements due to the repositioning of the Pacific High in the northwest moisture, but it's not a Columbia Basin. It's not a central, Oregon. It's not even really much of a pattern coming into the Snake River Valley, and it's certainly very dry in the southwest with this. But some model forecasts had kept much of the northwest extremely dry through the first, 10 days of December. I'll tell you why that's going on soon. But this is what I'm most keen on. We know this area's been in drought. We're bringing in decent precipitation, 2-3+ inches of moisture into this region, and it needs every single drop of it down here in the south. So let's walk through this and kind of see how things are shaping up. If you were to watch the progression of that ridge, it's almost off the page. This was the first movement of the Pacific High. It kind of whipped through here and ran out. But the most dominant feature is this. There's a deep trough sitting over the North Atlantic, starting in the Hudson Bay. But what has happened in the models recently is we've extended this trough all the way back, honestly, to the Gulf of Alaska. And that seems to be favoring more of a ridge feature in the west, meaning the flow's trying to come in a lot like this. Now, we can use northwest flow east of the Rocky Mountains to make big storm systems. But after a while, this is just too dry a flow. You get little weak clippers that come through here, but you're not able just to tap into the full, reservoir of moisture coming from the Gulf. And that's going to be an issue. Now, you know that this was well featured, right? Remember how I kept showing you those Hofmuller diagrams that just said, hey, Hudson Trough to North Atlantic Trough is just going to be a mainstay of this pattern going forward, and it's still there. But watch this. Zooming in on North America, go into the European ensemble. Watch how this all sets up. Watch all of the little features orbiting around the low, that's sitting over the Hudson Bay versus the high that's trying to build off the west coast. So I'm talking like this guy and that guy and these little short waves. Ready? So this is Tuesday when the small little nor'easter goes through. Another round of cold air. It goes again. See the next wave that comes through by Saturday? Then we have another one sneaking through here and here by Monday into Tuesday. And a third one, or fourth or fifth, I don't know how many we've counted, but right here, Tuesday night. And you just see that setting up. But what is very peculiar to me about this pattern is that we're seeing it set up into long waves doing something like this when we're out about 11 days. And now there's these two areas of low pressure we can see when looking at North America. Mainly the high pressure of the Atlantic is offshore pretty far. In other words, this would have to be really tucked in like we thought we saw models doing with it, a week ago. And that's what's going to limit some of the midsection of the country to moisture. We're also going to split. The northwest should be wetter. The southwest with no good flow will be drier. So put it all together, you get this. Okay, this is the main story. Next 2 weeks, the best flow seems to be entering here. We then have clippers that come through. Each little short wave that sneaks around the Hudson Trough, yeah, it has a chance. But without the full pull on Gulf moisture, this region tends to go back over drier, and we're leaving California and Southwest more out of the flow. So you tend to get systems that bring stuff here, but they don't have the full kind of juice just to rip through the United States on Southwest flow. We're waiting on that to develop. So there you go. And remember, a lot of this is coming in the next 5 to 7 days. So big picture, now let's talk temperatures for it. Here's right now, next 5 days. No surprises there. We know we have multiple rounds of cold air coming off the Canadian prairie into the eastern half of the country. Mild Alaska, western United States. This is day 5 through 10, where we now begin to see the troughing here and extending there. Okay? And this is day 10 through 15. Now that is an interesting look. And the reason is because we just kind of have a rule of thumb, right? If you're going to make Alaska cold, we tend to bump this up with a lot of heat in this area. But we've got an interesting jet stream pattern that's going to favor a corridor of cold in through here, at least through the front half of this month. We'll look beyond that in a few moments. Okay, let's do some model comparison. Left is GFS, right is European. So playing this forward, we see the first two systems we've talked about. Okay, there they are. One's coming down the Rockies, one's going up the East Coast. There it is. That's our nor'easter. Right? That would be Tuesday at noon. That exits. The Clipper moves over the Great Lakes. Snow moves down the Rockies by Wednesday. That was all pretty well forecast. That area of high pressure has got a punch to it. It's going to get very cold with this. And then as we see that cold air come through, where's it going to push the best boundary? To the south. And that is where we're going to see our rains begin to overspread, a boundary stuck between two areas of high pressure. Now at this stage, we do see a system coming into the northwest by Friday. But the model timing in this has been all over the place. But it is coming through this weekend, hitting the northwest, bringing in a lot of snow to the the Cascades in Washington and the northern Rockies. And as that system comes through, we expect to get a little system sneaking through the country. See it? But it's just starved. You're saying, what's it starved from? Well, there's a front here in both models associated with this low. Okay? So how do you get moisture to return? It's got to go over that front. So the system comes plowing through and just ends up looking like a little clipper moving through the Midwest and tries to get its act together farther to the east, but the models don't agree 1 week out on what that might look like. But take note, still more flow in the northwest, but not in the southwest. And because these fronts tend to block moisture return, there's a big section of the country that tends to miss out on the total moisture. And I'm only going to take you out a week in this forecast right now because we've already seen significant separation in this. Now look at the week 2 forecast, but it's going to be the ensemble blend. So there is snow. You saw that. This is the chance through the next 5 days of grabbing an inch. All right, take a good look. Let's step it up to 3 inches, and there's your Rocky Mountain snow. There's the little skiff we expect to sneak through here, bringing in 2 to 3 inches. There's our heavier amounts as we get into the higher elevation and the lake effect. And then the amplification of this as it gets into the northeast, where if you look at the 6-inch probability, there you go, right there in Massachusetts. So there's our Rocky Mountains, lake effect, and then that. If we go up to 12, not a whole lot in this pattern over the next 5 days. But let's just go ahead and take it out to 10 days. Let's just go out there and see. And that's what it looks like by 10 days on the probability of 12, probability of 6, and the probability of 3. Now can you find that corridor around the Hudson Trough? There it is. Comes right in through here and rolls east. Total precipitation-wise, I told you I'm worried about the drier area. This is next 10 days, probability of staying under a ½ inch of total liquid equivalent. So your wet areas are in white, but man, look at that. quite dry. In fact, let's take it down to 1/10 of an inch. Much of California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, this is very dry. Same thing for Nebraska. So good thing we got a little bit of snow recently in Nebraska to at least put something on the ground. Wetter side of things, here's the chance at 2 inches. Look at that. And then the Northwest. 1 inch, let's go to that just so we can see if we're going to be really making a dent in this drought situation that's farther to the south. All right. Now, week 2. Take note of a couple of things with the winds. We're going to be watching by Wednesday into Thursday the first big system enter the Northwest. Look at that, by Friday. Look at this. Strong, very strong winds. But this is what's going to make the rain shadow so strong. Why we're drier in the Columbia Basin and Central Oregon and the Snake River Valley. But as I play it out there, let's just go out a full 10 days. You notice that these systems, each one of them, kind of packs a punch with winds coming through the plains, Great Lakes, and Northeast. I think it's going to continue to be a story as we look out there farther into week 2. But each of the models kind of honed in on a similar outlook. We're wetter in the Northwest. Systems are coming around like this. Okay, can you see it? But we are not opening up the Gulf to a lot of moisture transport, which is why week 2 is looking drier in that region I just highlighted from the central U.S. toward the East Coast going forward. You can even see that the CPC wants to keep it back pretty far to the west as well. All right, temperature-wise, let's get into that. Frost risk map, no surprises here on what this looks like, but watch these kind of almost bowling ball-looking shots at colder air. Here's today's high temperatures. Okay, watch that move toward the Mississippi Valley, into the Ohio Valley, Tennessee Valley, and then move its way toward the east. There we go. And here comes the next one. These are high temperatures on Wednesday. And as we go from Wednesday into Thursday, very cold air this Thursday moving through the Midwest. Notice the West not really reflecting much of a pattern change. In fact, it's even getting warmer at times in the Northwest by Friday getting into Saturday. And there comes another one right there by Sunday. Multiple shots of Arctic air. And you can see it in the ensemble when I just played over a 5-day sliding window. There's your next 5 days. There's day 5 through 10. So you saw multiple rounds of colder air coming in here. By day 5 through 10, we're watching colder air settle in here and here, and more mild air across the western half of the United States getting up toward British Columbia. And we start to see the possibility, and I can't rule this out, of a mid-month like thaw across a broader section of the United States. I think what you're seeing here is just the influence of some of the snow that's on the ground and what the models are doing with it. But I think we could melt some of this and get some moisture into the ground. Okay, longer range. Let's go look at the latest updates we've got from the Climate Prediction Center. We'll look at 3 different sets of maps on this. The first is the week 3, week 4 map. And this is what I thought would happen. I thought we could push more of that colder air east. Remember that? We had it anchored here a lot. And I'm like, no. I think it's there. And I think the CPC found that, pretty clear forecast as well. Staying mild across the south seems to be the mainstay of this. And I do agree with their mid-December precipitation outlook. It actually goes from the 13th to the 26th. This makes a lot of sense to me. They do update at the end of the month their 1-month outlook. And again, that temperature change they put in here makes a ton of sense to me. All right. What we do know is that getting into the middle of the month, well, the next 2 weeks, this area does have risk of going drier. We know we're going wetter here very soon. But how much of this actually happens? I'm going there today. I got to tell these folks if I believe in this or not, because I've watched model run after model run over-promise moisture to Montana that's not manifest itself. And then I know this goes out for the entire month. A lot of this right now is over the next, you just saw it, next 10 to 15 days. I don't think we hang on to that once we get out there toward or past the middle of the month. I think this goes back over very active at that stage. But with all of this, the third set of maps to look at is their new seasonal outlook. And this is one that I'm going to have to wrestle with because I had seen pretty clear evidence that this region was likely going to stay into some form of drought and not see much relief over the coming weeks. Now, their new outlook, which gets to the end of February, from November 30th to the end of February, CPC said drought remains but improves. I know we got moisture coming in there now, and that's huge. They need every inch of it. But we cannot watch a winter miss this region. And there's just worry that it might do that. That's all I'm going to say. It's going to watch it carefully, okay? Now, bigger picture things. When I think the La Niña likely reached its peak was right here, late October into November. That was when we saw the lowest momentum in the flow. The Bermuda high was gone. Everything was just stuffed into this weak, pathetic pattern. And then we watched this. The momentum came up. Now, as the momentum continues to stay through November about average and rise itself, go up at the end of November, a lot of that had to do with the getting rid of this and the building of that. Now, that is just south of the equator, but Matt talked a bit about this last week, and I'm curious what's going to happen as this continues to edge its way toward 30 north. If that comes back in the flow, that is actually a signal that La Niña is gone, and we're going to start to get a more, I would say, a more dynamic Pacific jet. Now, what does that mean? That's just a fluff word I tossed in there to tell you that I don't think it's going to get stuck into big variable north or polar jet. I think we might see the subtropical jet come back. Now, what does all that translate to? Well, first of all, understand this. This is going to come in ebbs and flows. Now, I know we're using the CFSV2 model, but I like Victor's website. He's saying that the momentum is higher than average now, but it's going to back off a little bit. And that's going to take us in our global wind oscillation south of that line or below that line. Now, if you're up here, this is where we have, trough ridge pattern that's open, moving, resisting, blocking. When it gets down here, you get more circumglobal ridging events, which means the pattern slows down a little bit. But I think a lot of this movement around here is because of what we're expecting the MJO to do. And I'm just going to come back to something I mentioned. We've seen the MJO historically try to go through phases 6 and then just plow through phases 8 and 1. But if you want to get just the full effect of an 8-1-2, you're going, what does that mean? That's brutally cold across much of the United States. You got to come higher amplitude, first of all. And right now, these new forecasts are like, they're going to test the waters and then maybe crash back toward null space and open up here. Can you see it? Now, how long does it take to do that? The fact is, we're spending time on that side of the diagram, which is the cold side. But this MJO is more complicated than that. And look, remember how we were watching this? Okay, well, look, let's just go this. Let's shrink that up a little bit. There we go. Watch as I go backward here. Now, what last week I was like, hey, look at that. And look at that. Subsidence coming into this area. That's going to keep rising motion here. Look, that's phase 8-1, pretty high on it. We knew this big Kelvin wave was coming through. Now look at this. Watch how the models have changed. That's now the present forecast. Here's our big convectively coupled Kelvin wave. Here's the sinking motion that follows it. Then there's another. That's why I think now my forecast is going to change for the middle of the month to tell you that what we just saw to end November and start December, well, we're going to go over into this change. You just saw it. It's the cold Alaska, the cold Hudson, and then we're going to go back. But what is no longer here is you saw these colors across a broad area sitting there. That's what made me think we're going to get to better 8-1 action, but I think it's not. It's not there in the forecast anymore. There's other parts to it as well. Remember how much we watched this? Well, where is that big stuck trough now? We can kind of just outline those blues. It's sitting in there. So that's your Hudson to North Atlantic trough. And the ridging is here. See that? Actually comes like that. How far off the coast does it stay? And is there a subsequent ridge that lives Scandinavia into Russia? These are going to be the unanswered questions we're going to have to monitor. Matt and I will talk about it all week. I do know this. The polar vortex is very weak right now. If you want to see it, it looks a mess. Look at that. That's your sudden stratospheric warming event. Look how displaced and off-kilter this thing is. I think we're going to see a winter where that doesn't ever come back to good alignment and just stay strong. Look at this. Even the forecast says, you know what? Through the first 2 weeks of December, bring it back up. But where does it bring it back up to? Close to average. And then the mean, of all of these forecast members keeps it weaker than normal throughout a lot of winter. So what do you do with all of this? Let's actually get to something, because these are all European model forecasts. That's what I showed you. So it was to make sense of this. The 7-day forecast, let's take you back. There we are now, okay, through the first week of December. There's that possible mid-month milder run at things. I don't know, let's call it that. And then we watch it go right back. There it is. See? Right back into that same look. What I will be wondering is, do we have something to open Gulf, to use the cold air to bring in lots of snow? Do we load the Rockies? Do we get flow because of the presence of high pressure here to go away to return moisture to California? This is what the models are saying for the 30 days of, there it is. That's 30 days of December. Remember, a lot of this is coming in the next 7 or 8 days. We know that this was going over drier because the flow's coming around, the front's blocking. It's only that through the front half of the month. I think it breaks away for the second half of the month. And then you take note that the presence of the Pacific high is here. A lot of clipper action there. And I think this is La Nina's last hurrah. I just do. I think this is it. I think it's gonna fade pretty quickly. And I think January is going to bring an entirely different scenario. Now I can show you some of January. That is December 15 to January 15. Did you see it? The model says, no. Get that high away. Increased chances of moisture here. Open the Gulf. That's not a dry signal really for anybody in North America. But is this La Nina really doing that? So I'll make a case for it. This is the latest ocean temperatures. I've hammered away on the IOD fading. But this is our big question. And if you look right now, the latest Southern Oscillation Index, like we talked about last Wednesday, was at a peak and is starting to fade. It's got a long road to get there, but December could provide the runway for that. Meaning that by the time we start the new year, we may be talking about a substantially weakened La Nina that is going to be trading its trade wind momentum for westerly jet momentum. And that's not only going to affect us, but the other part of the planet that is a westerly jet, and that's South America. Now, this has been, as you saw last week, a forecasting disaster from our models. The European models way overpredicted this rainfall, and it didn't manifest itself right in through here. This is your last month's worth of precip. We've been drier in northern Argentina, Rio Grande do Sul, Uruguay. Drier in a big chunk of the Cerrado here. Wetter in Parana, wetter in part of Mato Grosso. But that's been the mainstay of the precip. And the models are back to their old tricks. That's the European model for the next week. That's 10 days. Look at the dryness that the model's putting in here. But holy cow, is it trying to bring in moisture week 2 into that area. 14-day outlook, which is where I started. Most of this is the next 10 days drier, but it's soaking this region in the middle of December. And if it does, that is a perfect recipe for big crops. There are going to be some disease pressure out of this, but great crops. Now, what does the GFS say? Well, all right, the next week looks similar. Day 10, yeah, sure. More broad dryness here. Week 2 brings in the rain too farther to the south. 14-day looks like that. So look, there's some model differences. And once again, what do we have? GFS is drier, European is wetter. I'm very disappointed in model predictions right now for South America. So we're just going to keep monitoring it. We'll take another look when we get more data from the NDVI. But I've been going on and on because it took 4 days off. I didn't have a chance to talk to you. So that's what I've got. Be safe. We'll talk to you all week long. Matt will pick it up tomorrow. Thanks.